I'm going to talk about a lot of things today and cram a lot of crap into 20, 30 minutes, so bear with me and I'm going to try not to lose you. I've got an appetizer to kind of get your brain going in the direction I need it to. I'm going to talk about something really exciting and sexy, data centers. This is a very famous picture. If you Google data centers, this is one of the pictures that will pop up. And of course, it's not actually a picture of a data center. It's a picture of the cooling infrastructure beneath one, the pipes and the water and all the things that keep the data center going. I've got this up here because Google is, whether you know it or not, very famously very good at data centers. There's a thing called power usage effectiveness. Any total geeks in the room? Data center people? Oh, a couple, all right. And you will know that the point of power usage effectiveness, this is a number and you're trying to get it as close to 1 as you can. This is one of those numbers that's exponentially more difficult the closer you get to 1, so you never quite get there, but you're trying to get it as close to 1 as possible. Industry standard at the moment is about 1.7. Google has been running for a couple years at 1.1, so we're world leaders in this, right? And there are billions of dollars in operating costs lying between that 1.1 and that 1.7. Google, however, is never satisfied with the status quo. This is a famous thing about my company. The 10x thinking stuff that you may have heard about is a way of articulating an institutional bias to never be satisfied with the status quo, to always challenge it, always, in all things. I'll talk later about challenging the chairs that you sit on. So, unsatisfied with being one of the world's leaders in data centers, there have been a number of initiatives that have over the years tried to improve that power usage effectiveness. And about a year and a half ago, a company that we acquired called DeepMind, we're all in London, so we've probably all heard of DeepMind. Do you know what that one is? Yeah, AlphaGo and all that stuff. DeepMind decided to take a crack at it, and they came up with a system using artificial intelligence that reduced the overall running costs of a data center. Again, remember, we're already at that 1.1 by 40% on an annual basis. That's a $1 billion number annually, globally. What are we going to talk about today? We are going to talk about the culture of innovation at Alphabet. I'm not going to talk about this as an innovation. That's innovation as a noun. Doesn't interest me. I'm not going to talk about innovation as a verb. Do innovative things. That is interesting, but less so for me than the concept of innovation as an adjective. How do you create a culture of people that want to be innovative all the time, that are empowered and enabled to be innovative all the time? And what does the organization that is composed of those people look like? What I'm not going to talk about is any of the things on this slide, either because I know nothing about them, or because if I did sell you anything about them, agents from the Illuminati would immediately emerge from the corners and kill me, right? So who am I? Tom has already done a really good job. About 15 years ago, I was running a head of innovation program at a big multinational headcount company, greater than 300,000. It was awful. Anybody in that job right now? Big multinational head of innovation, hate your job? I left that job after having done a talk in a red t-shirt. I went and did that startup that Tom was talking about. That was a spectacular failure. And the best illustration of how spectacular I can give you is that one of the multiple CEOs that was at that startup at the time is, to my knowledge, still being pursued by federal prosecutors, and that's why you can't see his face. And at Google, I've done a couple of things, but most of the time I was at Google, I've run a program called Google Developers Launchpad. If you don't know about it, go Google it. Very cool. We help startups around the world. So I've got a diverse range of experience in this concept, and when I came to Alphabet, I was very excited because from the outside I could see, wow, there's something special going on there, but I didn't understand what it was. And after about 4 years, I'm starting to articulate a hypothesis that I want to share with you about what actually makes it different. To talk about that, we have to talk about that horrible culture eats strategy for breakfast bullshit, right? This is actually an important quote from Larry. Larry once said that his purpose in terms of organizational design was to try to create an organization, this is a great sentence, so remember it, that knows how to spot and capture the future. Eric, equally, in similar context, talks all the time about this particular cultural stuff. So far, so good, except somewhere, right now, on a stage, there's an executive from your company saying the exact same damn thing. Right? Right? Have you ever stood up on a stage and said something like this? Come on. And here's the problem. Bell curves, Gaussian distributions, if we're all saying it, it's bullshit. It's not true. It can't be, mathematically. It just can't be. So there's something wrong. So what I'm going to ask you is to suspend disbelief for the next 15, 20 minutes and accept for the purposes of my argument that there actually is something different at Alphabet. And I will attempt to explain to you what I think that is. I'm going to start by talking about the concept of time. And you're going to find, I hope, that this particular concept, however strangely I approach it, fits very well with the subject, the theme of the conference here in the next 2 days about being more human. I'm going to talk about why being busy is bad, why redlining is really bad, and doing it all the time is insanely counterproductive. And to talk about why, I'm going to hit you first thing in the morning with some heavy maths. This is a thing called Little's Law from queuing theory. Ever heard of that? Excellent. A few hands. That's good. So queuing theory is basically all about how we deal with pressure. It's the best way that I like to think about it. When you put a system under pressure by putting more and more things in its queue, how does it behave? And Little's Law is a mathematical axiom that tells us how it's going to behave. And it turns out that there's a really interesting corollary to Little's Law, which is that you can basically flip it in classical algebraical manner and work out that any given thing that behaves as a server, that might be you trying to manage your email inbox, that might be the guy behind the till at a store or the guy at a post office, the queues snaking through the building. Anything that behaves in that manner, when it's utilized over about 70%, its response time goes exponential. It's a hockey curve. You go above 70%, and all of a sudden the server is thrashing, and it can't respond to any new requests. You know what that feels like. When your inbox gets over that threshold, and all of a sudden you can't answer any emails at all. Trying to achieve what people refer to often in the business as 100% productivity is not only insane, it is mathematically unsound. And it will lead you down a path of lower productivity, unhappiness, and less innovation. How do I know? Because of this thing, which you will have almost certainly heard of. That insane thing where Google allows their people to take 20% of their time and do whatever they want. You understand it probably, however, wrong. You think that means that Google has put some kind of thing in place where people are allowed to go off and monkey around and that keeps them happier. No, it's the other way around. You're missing the 80%. 20% time is an institutional bias to keep utilization below 80%. Its purpose is to make sure that all of the corporate antibodies and the middle managers don't inadvertently start to create a culture that drives utilization above 80%. This escape valve in the culture forces the entire company over time, on average, there are peaks and valleys, to stay at about 80%. And that allows us to do all of these things. Every single one of these logos, every major brand you've ever encountered from Google is either the direct product of a 20% project or has had its product development trajectory profoundly influenced by it. Over 60% of Google's output in terms of products, technologies, and new services is the outcome of a 20% project. The math is incontrovertible. And every single human who doesn't understand it and tries to achieve 100% utilization is simply wrong. It's not a matter that we can debate. I'm really passionate about this because it's really counterintuitive. People believe that being busy is a signal of success, of being productive. It is not. There are deeper things that it then enables. Let's talk about two more. Larry talks often about trying to maintain a startup culture at scale. This is the next plank that Google builds on. So you've got your people humming at about 80%. That allows them to behave in a certain way. What do they then do? Startup culture at scale is often misunderstood. I need a foosball table. No. That's a consequence, not a cause. What you need is to treat everything as a hypothesis. Absolutely nothing. Nothing is sacred. Anything can be challenged. If I don't like the chair that I'm sitting at in the office, I can reach out to an organization within Google who's in charge of facilities and say, show me the data that you use to choose these chairs that shows that they fit into certain ergonomic standards. And if they can't show me that data, I get a new chair. Because everything has to have a test. If everything is a hypothesis, everything has to have a test. If you've ever worked in a startup or been involved in the startup ecosystem, you know that a startup lives and dies by this. They treat everything, their business model, their organizational model, the value proposition that they're taking to market, whether they have product market fit or not, all of these things are treated as hypotheses that they are constantly seeking to test. But when you have built a successful organization, typically an interesting thing happens. You stop being an organization that seeks to spot and capture the future, which almost all startups inherently are, and you start being one that seeks to optimize for the status quo. That's where efficiencies begin to become important. And optimizing for the status quo prevents you from doing some of these things. It takes the focus away from the things that are actually the most important. The things that everybody else is going to be talking about here, which includes this famous phrase. Where else does this manifest itself? The third thing that I'm going to talk about is probably the most subtle and the hardest to get your head around. When an organization is behaving the way that I'm describing at scale, a weird thing starts to manifest. Rather than a kind of a classic org chart-ish, designed, engineered sort of organizational system that you could look at, the pictures that you could draw of Google look more like biological systems. And there's a particular concept from biology that I'm going to pull out and shove in your face. And it revolves around this idea, redundancy. Because in organizations optimized for the status quo, redundancy is a really bad thing. It's a waste. You can't have two separate departments doing the same thing. Let's combine them. Let's lay off some of those people, drive the share price up. Inefficient, right? The problem with that is this horrible word. Please don't Google this. This word is profoundly associated with Nazis and all kinds of horrible things, and it's really unfortunate because in biology, it's actually a very real term, and it means a kind of redundancy, a type of redundancy. If we think about structural redundancy as being isomorphic, those two chairs are the same, so they're redundant. Functional redundancy is where two different things can do the same thing in a pinch if they need to. And biological systems are full of this. The crudest and not quite accurate example is the examples you've heard about brain plasticity, where somebody gets a chunk of their brain chopped out and lose the ability to speak for 6 months, but then regain it because a different part of their brain, optical nerves, reconfigure themselves to start doing things that they weren't able to do before. Biology is full of this. And it turns out that this is essential for evolutionary fitness. Organisms that have a high degree of degeneracy are very adaptable. They are robust in the face of disruptive change. Organisms that don't tend to be very, very optimized, like an alpha predator. They're very efficient, and they're very good as long as the status quo doesn't change. But when it does, they prove to be very fragile. Organizations that are optimized to spot and capture the future are rife with what looks like redundancy. It is not. It is a feature, not a bug, because its purpose is to maintain that degree of robustness in the face of disruptive change and a degree of adaptability to flex and shift and move in a way that an organization that has been streamlined for the status quo no longer can. Proof. Well, you know the proof. We are the company that puts out 3 different products doing exactly the same damn thing. Do it all the time. People hate it. Drives them crazy. They can't figure it out, but that's because partially you've been brainwashed to think that it's essential to get it right. It's not. Try something. See what works. This one, the death of Google Reader. Some people still mourn it, thinking it was a wonderful thing, but we are ruthless about killing things, even if they seem successful, when the data shows us that it is not. Everything is a hypothesis. Every one of these is the product of the things that I'm talking about. It's either a 20% project, its trajectory was profoundly influenced by one, or it is currently internally under attack from 4 different other projects that we're developing, any one of which could succeed but will probably fail. Evidence. These are all of the teams, broadly speaking, at Google that focus from an outsider's perspective explicitly on what people talk about as innovation. I'll go through them quickly. Everything on the left-hand side of the screen, right-hand side of the screen, as I'm standing here, is the startup-y stuff. So down at the bottom, we've got GV, the artist formerly known as Google Ventures. That's a venture capital firm. We've got Google for Entrepreneurs, now called Google for Startups. Those are the people that run Google Campus around the corner from here in Shoreditch. We've got Launchpad, which is a program I ran, which is a startup ecosystem outreach program with mentors. And we've got probably the most interesting one for you, Area 120. Ever heard of Area 120? No? Area 120 is Google's internal startup incubator. So if you have an idea at Google that could be a product, whether it seems to fit inside Alphabet's portfolio or not, you can apply twice a year to be part of the next cohort at Area 120. If you get accepted, you get funding, your team gets pulled out of their day jobs, and you all go off to work for 6 months full-time on this new startup idea. If it works, a new Alphabet company will be spawned, you will get equity, you could become the CEO of it. These things are all part of the program at Area 120. This has 2 purposes. Number 1, it encourages people inside the company to continue to try to innovate this way, but it's also a catch them as they're going out the door kind of a thing. The most profound driver of churn, employee churn at Alphabet, is people leaving to go join startups. So this is catch them as they're leaving and say, no, stay here. Most of the benefits without most of the risks. You're still on the payroll the whole time. On the right side, we have the things that are more classically understood to be innovation teams at Google. X, the Moonshot Factory, which was referenced by Tom earlier, is the most famous one. ATAP does hardware innovation. And we've got Google Brain and DeepMind at the bottom. Those are the 2 I'm going to focus on. Why? Take a look at this slide. I won't read it to you. You can read. Now take a look at this slide. Now we'll go back. And again. Not a lot of difference there. Google Brain is a team in Mountain View led by Jeff Dean that has been part of Google for about 10 years. They have created amazing things. TensorFlow, if you're familiar with that, is an output of the Google Brain team. They were, among other things, also working to optimize our data centers. They do this. DeepMind, an acquisition. They do more or less the same thing. With a slightly different approach, but more or less the same thing. They seem entirely redundant to one another. And yet if we hadn't not only tolerated, but sought out that degree of apparent redundancy, we would have never put ourselves in the place where DeepMind could come along a year and a half later and come up with that 40% improvement in data center efficiency that saves us billions of dollars a year. There are hard, clear, bottom line consequences to behaving the way that Alphabet does. It's not a game. It's not a foosball table. It's billions and billions and billions of dollars. And happier, more innovative, more engaged, more exciting people. This is Astro Teller, who currently leads X, the Moonshot Factory. This is one of those things that's easy to say and hard to believe. And I used to be, when I was in that head of innovation role, the guy sitting in the back row on a conference like this thinking, oh, what a load of crap. But it's not. It really isn't. And although I can't actually show you a picture of what Google's org chart looks like, if I could draw one, it would look a lot more like this than the one that your company probably has. Take this away. 100% utilization. Super bad. Don't do it. And go back and fight the good fight. Get 80% utilization or lower established as a cultural norm. Your company will instantly become more productive, more adaptable, more disruptive. Treat everything like a hypothesis, because it is. And part of the treating everything like a hypothesis is it's a point-in-time hypothesis. Just because it was true and valid 10 days ago doesn't mean it still is today. And degeneracy, as horrible as the word is essential to evolutionary fitness. And that applies to you, to your organization, to anything that functions in the physical world. Thank you.